right, and welcome back. We have our first discussion for you this morning, as we made mention this Friday. It's all about families as we celebrate and recognize International Families Day, which is on May 15th, actually. That's on Sunday. And so, in for our first conversation, we have Crystal Humes, who's a licensed clinical psychologist, assess Belize psychological and therapy services. That's your business, right?
Yes, that's
Correct.
right.
Good morning,
Good
Ms. Humes,
morning.
Good morning, good
and
morning.
welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's such an honor to have you here discussing this important topic of families. And we want to delve into different family dynamics. Let's start by kind of setting the ground for what we mean when we say family dynamics. What is it that we're talking about here?
Well, when we refer to family dynamics, we're talking about the patterns or the relationship between the different members of that family. As you both are aware, and those of you listening at home, that there are different family structures. You can have extended family, nuclear family, sibling family, household, and so depending on who the members are in your particular family, the dynamics might be different.
Yeah, and in Belize, and I guess it's the same across the region, dynamics, there's a wide variety of dynamics within the homes. The variety is extensive. The importance of families, the importance of being a part of a family, the importance of a family to a child's development, to anyone's psychological, mental well-being. Speak a bit to how important family is.
Well, family is so important. You know, in order for a society to be healthy, it's in a great deal dependent on healthy families. So families provide us with basic needs. You know, all of us, we have very basic needs, such as the need for shelter, food. Family also is able to provide us with emotional support, financial support in many cases, practical support. So like if you need to call someone to say, hey, you know, I need help with this, you can count on your family for that. Our families are also able to provide us with values, you know, the things that those core components of who we are, or belief systems, as well as socialization, learning. So many of us, we learn through our interactions with our family members as to what is right, what is wrong, what are the cultural norms. And so family plays such an important role in our overall development, and like you said, also in our mental health as well.
Yeah, I would imagine that the family is the first level of interaction we have as a child. You know, that's the first sort of social engagement. And so you could imagine the importance of that early engagement. It's like an empty bottle, a fresh new bottle, and whatever you fill that with initially, that leaves the stain, that leaves the imprint on that empty bottle. Now, speaking of family dynamics, when we're talking about patterns, we're talking about behaviors within a family, there's healthy dynamics, there's healthy patterns in families, and then there's also unhealthy patterns within a family. Would you speak perhaps to some of the family dynamics that you know of that may exist? Some of the different types of family dynamics, or different types of
Healthy dynamics, the
yeah,
unhealthy dynamics.
right.
Yeah, right. So there are some, when you research, you might find healthy versus unhealthy, or functional versus dysfunctional, and then they divide those further into different subcategories, such as you have the authoritative family dynamic, you have the authoritarian family dynamic, you have the alliance-based family dynamic, the communal family dynamic, and
Competitive.
right, yes, competitive
Yeah.
as well.
Just so because you think about to break these down just a little bit more in terms of family dynamic. When you think about the competitive family dynamic, if we're really saying that you have family members who are competitive
Right.
within
The
their homes.
household. Yeah.
Yeah, you understand that, April, do
I
you?
mean, I wouldn't say I understand it.
Yeah.
My question would be, you talk about these dynamics in a way that is healthy versus unhealthy, but one would argue that a competitive dynamic would be able to produce ambition in certain places, or high value careers in other places in their children. So, what really is healthy and what really is unhealthy?
Okay, so that's a very good question. And you're right that some people might argue that I'd say at what cost, you know? Yeah, it's good to have ambition, it's good to strive for excellence and all of these things, and there are ways to foster that in a way that doesn't put family members against each other, you know? So like comparing one child against another, or sometimes even the parents. Or siblings would compete against each other in order to see who is better.
Yeah.
And that adds a lot of pressure, that can lead to a lot of criticism, and can result in a lot of internalization of negative feelings about oneself.
And how do you begin to have that conversation? Because some people would say that, oh, this is the way my grandmother functioned, and the way my grandmother was able to quote unquote make the family household what it is, the matriarch per se. Those attitudes, those dynamics, those behaviors have transferred into the mother, and the mother is, how do you break that cycle? How do you have that conversation by, all right, this is not the way. I do want my child to have a successful career. I do want my child to be happy, but how do I do it differently?
Okay, absolutely. So I'm a huge advocate for when we know better, we do better.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes those patterns, like you said, they get passed on from one family member to the other, and with good reason, you know. There are times when certain patterns or certain approaches were necessary. We're allowed to evolve, we're allowed to change, we're allowed to learn new ways of interacting with each other. And if there are better ways, or if we have greater knowledge about how one thing, it might be beneficial in one area, but again, it might be disadvantageous in a number of other areas. So it's trying to find a way to attain the same goal, if it is that you want to encourage your children or ensure that they are ambitious and pursue their career or whatever value. Look at the core value and see, okay, how can we still attain that if the core value is to have a child who pursues excellence. That's a good value to have, absolutely. It's just how do we go about getting there?
I think when we look at the situation within some of the more impoverished areas in Belize City, we note a lot of, not all, I don't want to generalize, but we note a lot of unhealthy family dynamics, and it plays into the way a child or a family member interacts with society. One of the things I'm hearing from some members of the police force or persons seeking to solve the issue of crime is that they take note of the fact that many of these young men are looking for love, are seeking to be a part of a community, mainly because they did not get that within the family. Do you find that to be the case, in that unhealthy family dynamics can lead to these types of behaviors in society within a person?
Well, yeah, absolutely, because as I mentioned earlier, we have basic needs, and one of our basic needs is to have that sense of belongingness, that sense of purpose. And when we don't, I always say, when just because you don't to have something doesn't mean that you stop needing it.
Yeah.
You know, if something is a need, you still need that. Like, for example, if you need food, you still need food even if you don't get food. It
Yeah.
doesn't change the fact that you're still hungry. And so, because that's one of our basic needs, that sense of that need for belongingness, and that's a protective factor that helps to keep us safe, that helps to keep us connected to others, helps to and that's also an important component for our mental health as well, that sense of belongingness, that sense of purpose, and so when we lose that, we can absolutely look for it in other places because it's a need, and that need doesn't change whether or not we have access to that. We just find other ways of attaining that need.
I want to follow up on that because we were talking about the things that influence family dynamics, right? So perhaps you have a household that is a relatively healthy setting. What do you think would be certain things that would change that setting to an unhealthy dynamic? How do you go from a healthy family household to an unhealthy family household?
Okay, so lots of things can result in going from a healthy family dynamic to an unhealthy family dynamic, such as various events that might occur, like a divorce, so a traumatic event, maybe an accident or a death. Also, any other issues such as mental health issues, or if a child becomes sick or a family member becomes sick and there's an added financial strain, if there's the presence of a mental health condition that then changes the dynamics. So there's so many different factors that can result in a healthy family going to the point of engaging in those unhealthy dynamics.
As a child, I know you're not a child psychologist, but you know, when I was younger, my parents used to say, "You're a kid and you don't need to know the problems that adults face," right? So, you know, certain parents would try their best to hide maybe the loss or economic or financial struggles that they go through so that the kids don't have to. But do you think that having an open conversation or dialogue with the children would, in the longer run, make the household better? Hiding things from kids, I feel like kids know. You know, they feel that tension in the household and they know something is wrong and it still affects them in some kind of way. So, yeah, how do you maneuver through those influences so that it doesn't affect the dynamic?
Well, I agree with you in that kids they're very aware, you know, they pay attention, and so I'm a huge advocate for honesty, open conversations, age appropriate, of course, and not to burden the child with what is happening or what the family is going through, but just to keep it very age appropriate. So to maybe say that right now that it doesn't have a job, and so we have to cut back on certain things. And then, of course, if the child asks other questions, because usually they are the ones who, you know, are able
The
to...
conversation does stop at, okay, I don't explain it to you.
Right, yes. And so when they ask questions, again, to try to be as open and honest, but while remaining age appropriate and not burdening them with the weight of what is really going on. And of course, doing your part as the parents or the older siblings or the guardians to ensure that what is happening in what is happening isn't spilling over and affecting how you interact with your children or grandchildren or whomever.
When we look at the different types of family dynamics, one of them is the authoritative family dynamic. I think we often see that. That's a common one, as I understand it, in homes across Belize. It's not necessarily a negative, but would you speak to some of the pros, perhaps, and some of the cons of having an authoritative family dynamic?
Well, yeah, so you're absolutely right that in Belize we see that a lot. I think that it it varies if an authoritative family dynamic, if it's borderline in controlling,
Yeah.
you know, where it's just the parent is, you need to do this, you need to do that. That's not ideal. Ideally, we'd want to have boundaries and rules, so that there's structure in the
Right.
home, and but also the feelings and opinions of the other family members are validated
Right.
and listened to.
I mean, you're so right. It can't be where the father or mother, for whatever reason, decides that they'll just be the dictator in the home. I think as children, especially when you become a teenager, and you tend to want a certain level of freedom, you tend to want a certain level of conversation as well within the family, in terms of you want to express certain feelings. You now have a say. At least you feel you have a
Right.
say in the decision making within the home. And you want to have a say. And when your dad or your mom tells you no, I the boss, and you just listen to me and shut your mouth, I could see where that negatively impacts the family dynamics in terms of emotional unavailability, per se. One of the unhealthy aspects of a family dynamic. How how can a parent uh, who understands that they have this issue where they're controlling, but they don't know how to properly speak with their loved one, their child, to kind of share feelings and share emotions, because maybe it's a generational thing. Where do they start?
Yeah, yeah. That's a very good question. I think that it's important to start with oneself, you know, to spend some time maybe reflecting, looking inwards, and trying to understand where that pattern comes from. I think self-awareness is a superpower.
Yeah.
That, you know, once you have that level of self-awareness, because you can't change anything unless you're aware that it's affecting you, or how it's affecting you, or that it's affecting the people that you love or you care about. So it's to start to pay attention. Pay attention to how your children interact with you, or how the people in your household interact with you, and how perhaps maybe your own childhood, the individual's own childhood experiences, and how they felt. And then, as difficult as it may be, is to allow yourself to be vulnerable. You know, we can't be vulnerable with other people if we're not, if we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable, and to be honest and open with ourselves, to tune into our own feelings, to tune into our own emotions, and acknowledge that we have feelings too. I always say that as long as you're a thinking, feeling, existing being, you have feelings, you know, and that to know that that is absolutely okay, and it's okay to acknowledge those feelings. It's okay to talk about those feelings, because you want to model that behavior, that it's okay, we're a family that can talk about how we're feeling. And I'm a huge advocate too for asking open-ended questions. So how are you doing? How are you feeling? How was school? How did you sleep? Just give an opportunity for the person to respond, for the person to have a voice. Like you said, we all have a voice, and we all want to be heard, even children, you know, and so it's very important to give them a voice from a very early age, to allow them to express themselves.
I think that I really like that answer. But you touched on some very crucial points in terms of allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and understanding that you have this kind of attitude or behavioral pattern. But what also I think Paul was trying to get at is that Belize as a society, we tend to criticize those kinds of acknowledgements. So if you are you know, we tend to criticize if you are doing it differently or doing it the way I grew up or doing it the way, you know, our friends grew up. How do you maneuver that kind of criticism? How do you not allow that to influence the way you decide to be with your family?
Okay. So you mean that they tend to criticize how the individual, just to clarify,
Yes, yes,
that,
yes, yes.
if you're a parent, that they would criticize, if you decide to be vulnerable, if you decide to be emotionally available to your children, that people would criticize that.
Yes.
Okay. So, yeah, well, that's a difficult one because we can't control what what people think or what
Yeah.
people feel or how they will react, right? And so that's why I think it's important to tune into yourself, because once you have that awareness and you know that, okay, this is impacting my family and it's impacting my family in a negative way, then and you have that awareness and you compare it to, okay, if I continue to do this, then this is what is going to happen, or that same pattern will repeat itself, and you know, because now you have that, you're paying attention more to you and you're seeing how this has affected you in other areas, not just in your household, but probably in a lot of other areas, because usually it does. When you have these dynamics, it affects you in a number of other areas. And so when you pay attention to that and you have that awareness, then you can use that as a guide to say, okay, well, I know how continuing this pattern, or how my parents continuing that pattern affected me. Do I want to continue that pattern just because of, out of fear of what other people will say, or how other people will criticize your parenting? And then that's a choice that the individual has to make, to whether they're going to value the other person's opinion over having a healthy family.
So let's talk a bit briefly about ways that we can strengthen our family relationships. I know that there may be viewers out there that some of these topics is kind of hitting them personally, and they're saying, yeah, I've been noting for a while that I need to do better in terms of building this relationship with my son, with my daughter, with
my
my
wife,
family, with my
yeah.
wife, husband. What are some of the ways we can implement to kind of strengthen our family relationships?
All right, so I think it goes right back to our basic needs, and again, paying attention to yourself, because as human beings, we all have very, we're different, yes, but in a lot of ways, we're very similar. And so if you pay attention to yourself and think about, okay, what was something that I needed as a child?
Yeah.
You know, what was something that I needed but I didn't get? And you'll find that for all of us, those things are very similar, that we all need love,
Yeah.
you know, and affection. We all need a safe space. So physically, it's important to create a safe environment at home where there's no abuse, whether verbal or physical or any other form of abuse. It's also important to spend time together. That's a big one, you know. And there are lots of ways to spend time together, to just perhaps have meals together, start having meals together, you know, or start going to the park together, just doing things together, because when you spend time with your family, you get to know them a bit more. And when you get to know them more, then you're better aware of their needs and what it is that you can provide or continue to provide for them. And so that's also important. It's important to also provide support and encouragement, and just be present too, you know.
That right there.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to be a provider, to support your family, to do all of these things, and also be present at the same time.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this conversation, because we are running out of time, I'm beginning to understand just from this brief conversation that working to build a healthy family dynamic is hard work.
Yeah.
That it takes time, it takes commitment, it takes being present all the time, right?
Absolutely.
And so definitely I would imagine those are things that we should be prepared for, or at least prepare our minds for, when it is time for us to decide we want to build a family.
Absolutely. That, like with everything else, it takes being intentional. We
Yeah.
can get a lot done once we're intentional, and our families deserve that, And so it might require working on those gray areas where all family dynamics, we all have different family
Yeah.
dynamics, and they're not all great. We all have areas that we can work on, whether it's just communicating more, whether it's spending more time together, or it's just learning to show affection and love more, because a lot of times we say, oh, we're a family, we do lots of things for each other, so it's obvious that we love each other. But I always say love in action, but also love in words, that it's important to hear that I love you, I care about you, I support you, I'm here for you, and just to continue to provide those opportunities for growth and for healing, because that's important too. Like we mentioned, those patterns that have been passed on from one generation to another that might require healing, and so to allow that healing to occur.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you so much, Crystal.
thank
for
you,
coming.
Crystal, for
Yes.
that. It's very insightful.
I think we could continue this conversation
course.
so much more.
But April, before we take our next break, we
Yes.
have a giveaway.
We have a giveaway. We were
And
supposed to
so
give this giveaway.
this
before.
is don't worry, we'll give away two things in this next segment, at the
alright.
top and at the bottom of that next segment.
Alright,
But
yes.
for our first giveaway, here's the prize, because I like get to the good news
Oh,
part
alright,
first.
my bad.
You get a chance to win $100 gift certificate for a family meal. You want to build some healthy family dynamics? Well, here's an opportunity for you to do that. $100 gift certificate for a family meal, courtesy Chonsan
Palace. All right.
so
And the way to win this,
Yes.
the way to win this is that you need to log into our Open Your Eyes BZ Facebook page.
Open Your Eyes.
Yes, Open Your Eyes. If you're not already watching, if you're not already there, go to our Facebook page, and you have to be the first to comment in the live stream of today's show. Yes.
So here's the question.
All right.
So here's the question, right? I'm all geeked up about this question. So the question is, you have to listen carefully, right? And remember, it's the Open Your Eyes page, not the News 5 page.
Open Your
It's
Eyes
the Open Your
BZ.
Eyes BZ page. It
Yes.
says, Johnny's mother had 3 children. The first child's name was April. The second child's name was May. What was the third child's name?
I'm telling us something, right? I should read this before we come on the show.
Go now, Open Your Eyes, BC. You heard the question. When we come back, we'll
One more
announce
time.
a winner for you. Sure, I should get
Yeah,
it one more time.
Just
One more time. Johnny's mother had 3 children. The first child's name, April. The second child was named May. What was the third child's name?
Then on June?
We'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll tell you who won.